Hi, and welcome back to the Asymmetrical Haircuts Summer Reruns. This episode comes from back in 2020 and looks at the case of Germain Katanga. Katanga was found guilty of being an accessory to 1 count of crimes against humanity and 4 counts of war crimes, but only after the judges changed the mode of liability in the case. Together with Lisa Clifford, we dive deep into whether justice was actually served and the long-term effects on both victim and accused.
Hi, this is Steph. I'm sorry to interrupt Jason. I'm just here to tell our listeners to stick right around to the end of this one because we have an update for you.
Yeah, and here's Janet. And really, it's a little bit crazy what we're going to add in at the end. I mean, just like this whole story that you're about to delve into with us with Lisa. So we'll speak again after the main podcast. Here's Lisa.
So, I mean, I'm already feeling very, very uncomfortable about the whole thing. But, you know, I'd come thousands of miles. I thought ideally, we would film you apologizing to this woman.
Medieval crimes are being committed.
I come with clean hands.
Victims of horrific crimes want justice.
We don't have anything better than this.
This is Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg.
All rise.
Lisa, hi. You're back in The Hague. This is great. Stephanie, Lisa, Stephanie.
Hi.
Hi.
This is Lisa Clifford, old friends, former colleague. We were both at an organisation, IWPR, eons ago. That was mainly covering the Yugoslav tribunal, but then got into the ICC, and you really pushed it on and took it forward. But now you're a filmmaker.
I am a filmmaker, yes, but I couldn't leave the subject of international justice, which I'm sure you're both very happy about. I made a film. About the Germain Katanga trial at the International Criminal Court.
And so you're back here to show it?
I am back here to show it. Yeah, I've been showing it at different locations in the UK and, actually in the US. But this is the first time it's been shown in The Hague. So that's very exciting. I'm wondering if some ICC people might come along. I don't know.
And it's called Militiaman, and it's about Germain Katanga. Who was Germain Katanga? What was happening? It's a long time ago for people to remember.
It is a long time ago. In fact, it's a long time ago for me to remember. I was reporting on the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and we kind of started with the Lubanga trial, which I'm sure you both remember very well. And after that came the Katanga trial. And we didn't pay a huge amount of attention to the Katanga trial at the time. I'm not really sure why. It didn't get as much publicity, and he was charged on the opposite side of that conflict, you'll remember. Germain was a Lendu, or in fact he was an Ngiti, and Thomas Lubanga was a Hema. So they'd kind of chosen, the ICC had kind of chosen people on the opposite side of the conflict. Germain was in prison in Kinshasa at the time when the ICC went looking for cases in Kinshasa, and he was scooped up and brought to The Hague, and he was charged with crimes in Bogoro, which is a small village about an hour from the capital of the region, Bunia. And as I said, I didn't really cover that trial too much, but I'd met his lawyer, David Hooper, who was a very interesting and generally quite charming and kind of amusing person, and I thought he'd make a great film.
Who would make a great film? David Hooper. Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it started. I'd interviewed him a few times, David Hooper, and I thought he would make a really, really interesting film, and I kind of found out what he was working on. And the Katanga trial was finished. Germain had been convicted, and he didn't have that much longer to serve on his sentence. And David, amazingly, somehow managed to arrange an interview with Germain at the ICC. He said, "Do you want to meet him and see what my big case was about?" And no one had ever interviewed anyone in custody at the ICC. And to this day, I'm never sure how it happened or why it happened. And I met Germain, and I thought, you know what? This is a very interesting film, because we'd also been to Congo a few months before we met him. We'd been to Bogoro, and we'd met a young girl called Sarah, who you see in the film. And Sarah told us that if she could tell Germain Katanga anything, she would tell him she hated him, that he had killed her family and he had ruined her life. He'd burned down their village, he'd done unspeakable things, and she wanted to tell him that. So I got back to The Hague, and I told David I'd met Sarah, and he looked at the clip of Sarah and he said, "Germain should see this." I thought, okay. So he arranged this interview. We played the clip of Sarah saying, how much she hated Germain. He said, "Well, I want to apologize." And that's kind of how it started. So off the cuff, Germain recorded an apology to the people in Bogoro, and specifically to Sarah, who'd lost her family. And that's pretty much how the film started. And my idea very much was that Germain, who was about to be released, maybe he had 18 months left on his sentence, was going to go back, and he was actually going to apologize in person. I thought, well, this is a good film. This is probably better than a film about David Hooper. And that's kind of how it started.
Should we just go back into a little bit of the detail of the case? Because this was one that I think both, well, at least I remember, maybe you remember, Stephanie, as the one being about mode of liability.
I must admit that this started after I left The Hague for the former Yugoslavia and Senegal for a while. So I've been out of the loop largely on the Katanga trial. So this has to come down to your background knowledge.
Okay, so over to me on trying to remember what I remember about mode of liability.
Yeah, Jenna, what do you remember? Because I'm not sure how well I can explain it either, because my film's not about the trial.
No, but what I do remember is that partway through the trial, the judges looked at what was going on, and 2 out of the 3 judges said, okay, if we're going to go anywhere further with this, which was essentially saying if we're going to convict this person, we're going to have to change the basis on which we actually deal with him, and therefore the mode of liability, sort of, under what basis he's been charged. But one of the judges disagreed about that. That was Judge Christine van Wijngaard, and you use in the film a quote from her. So let's just listen to that now.
There is no reliable evidence that Germain Katanga played any role in the execution of the attack on the 24th. Much less in any of the crimes committed in Bogoro on that day. I would have acquitted the accused because the prosecution failed to prove Germain Katanga's responsibility as initially charged. I would have decided his acquittal a long time ago.
I remember reading that dissenting judgment, and we all did, and felt, well, we don't really have to appeal this, we just have to put this judgment in, because she had, nailed every point. A very forceful dissent. I don't think I've ever seen a stronger dissent on a judgment.
So that was David Hooper, and then he had to fight the trial basically again on this new mode of liability.
No, because this all happened after the trial had finished.
So this was what I remember from it, and what I know now in lore from defense lawyers is that actually they had the entire trial. The judges were looking at how to give weight to what the prosecution had showed, and said, well, what the prosecution showed doesn't show that he could be held responsible as a direct perpetrator, and so, but maybe he could be held responsible as a co-perpetrator, but the prosecutor didn't say that as a mode of liability. So technically, in some jurisdictions, then you can't change it. That's how UK law works, that you can't then change the mode of liability or change the charges to kind of suit what happened. But civil law does work that way, and judges can kind of work around and say, well, this is what we think has been proven, and that corresponds to this mode of liability. And then they changed it so he couldn't mount a defense on these bits. And so defense attorneys still have, when we talk to Melinda Taylor, they also mentioned the Katanga case as a way in which judges kind of think of things on their own and don't give the defense any chance to mount a case based on that. And that was a big scandal. So that's how I know the Katanga trial. And that's what happened in deliberations about the verdict. They kind of changed the mode of liability, and then there was no way to for the defense to respond to that.
Was David Hooper quite upset about all this? Or had he just accepted it by the time you were talking to him?
I think by the time we were talking to him, he'd accepted it. But the question that he gets a lot is, well, why didn't you appeal? Because Germain was convicted on his own evidence in the end. In an attempt to prove that he wasn't the one in charge of the whole operation, he'd admitted facilitating the crime. He'd admitted that. And of course, he never would have done that had he known that they were going to change the charges 6 months after the trial had ended. So he was convicted on his own evidence. So I think David thought there was probably quite a strong case for appeal. But as I said before, it wasn't long before he was about to be released. They'd made a deal with the prosecution that neither side would appeal anything. And when he came up for release, the prosecution wouldn't protest. And then Germain could go home. And that was what Germain wanted. He wanted to go back to Congo. And as David says in the film, David thought this was the fastest way to get him back to a Congo. No one appealed anything. And then 18 months later, he would be home. Of course, that's not what happened in the end.
So Katanga and Hooper both agreed he got fed up with being in The Hague. The fastest way out was not to appeal and just deal with the fact that he'd been in this prison and served the last tiny bit of his sentence and then go home. But that didn't quite happen as planned. What did happen?
What happened next is there was about a month left on his sentence. It was in December that he was meant to go home, and he had till the end of January left on his ICC sentence. So I'm not entirely sure why, but that meant that he could leave and he would serve his last bit of his sentence in prison in Kinshasa, in Makala prison. So off he went, and on the plane he went back to Congo, and he was expecting to be released. I think it was something like the 25th or 26th of January. So I was speaking to him just before that. He's like, I'm not being released. It's like, what do you mean? He's like, I've been charged again with more war crimes. And they were very, very similar to the war crimes that he had been charged with in The Hague. They were not the same. Bagaro, for example, wasn't mentioned at all, but it was the same time frame, the same area, the same conflict. So he was charged again, this time by the Congolese government. Now, you probably know, maybe you don't know, because I didn't know this, in order that someone who's been tried in The Hague to be charged again in another country, the ICC has to approve it.
Right, I was going to say, did the ICC not have any kind of inkling that this was going to happen? And are they obliged to divulge that to people?
I think that the defense team knew that there were legal issues brewing in Congo, but they thought it was a case that, remember I said when he was scooped up by the ICC initially, he was in prison in Kinshasa for the killing of some MONUC soldiers in Ituri. But the defense was very confident that there was no case to answer there, that Germain was in a different part of Congo at the time, and they weren't worried about that being a problem. That what they didn't have an inkling of was this brand new case, very, very much related to the charges that he'd already faced in Congo. So what the ICC knew, this I couldn't answer. I have no idea. But this came as an absolute bolt out of the blue to the defense and to Germain himself.
I'll just slightly go back for people who are not into the Congo as much as probably you and me are. MONUC is the UN forces operating in Congo. So these are UN blue helmets that he was accused of attacking.
Exactly. He was part of an attack, and can't remember how many peacekeepers were killed. 9 or 10, I think.
I don't remember that, but basically that were the charges, and his defense thought that if there are some legal issues, probably these old blue helmet charges, exactly. And we can fight them because we know he was completely somewhere else, so it will be fine if he goes back because we will fight that and he'll be on the streets in no time.
Yeah, we're not too worried about that, but that's never been mentioned again. No one has ever mentioned that case again. It's dead or disappeared or has vanished somewhere. So the new case is completely and utterly related to something different. And
so how long has he been back? And has he been in Congolese prison all the time since he's been back?
Yeah, he's been back for 4 years now, and he's been in Makala prison in Kinshasa that entire time.
And he has been charged with something?
He has been charged with new war crimes, very, very, very similar to the war crimes in The Hague, but the case is very, very vague, and we've seen the case file. I've seen the case file, and it's epic. And you can see in the film his Congolese lawyer leafing through all these very random documents. So it's not an empty file, but nor is it very specific. It doesn't seem to relate to Germain in any way. It relates to crimes that were committed. There's some quite gory pictures of villagers with their heads, cut from their shoulders, but it's not clear who or what happened to these people. So he has been charged, but nothing has happened in 4 years.
And you talk about his Congolese lawyer, but Buisman and Hooper, his ICC lawyers, are still with him? They follow this case till to the day, or?
They're with him in the sense that the reparations process has been ongoing, or was ongoing for many years. So that's the ICC part of the case still. So they still go to Congo. But it's related to the ICC case. He as far as the Congolese case is going, he's pretty much on his own. And what I should have said, and I forgot to say, is that the ICC approved this case. The presidency of the ICC said it was okay for Congo to proceed with this case, that they were quite sure Germain would get a fair trial in Congo. And it was the presidency that made the decision. And David and the legal team, they didn't know where to appeal. Nothing like this had ever happened before. He said, well, where do we even appeal? Who do we complain to about this? There was no mechanism to say that this is entirely wrong, that Germain will not be getting a fair trial in Congo. Where does this come from? Have you even looked at the charges? And occasionally I was in Congo when I was filming, and you kind of look at the back of the courtroom, and there's a couple of people from the ICC there watching what happens in the court. So they're certainly keeping an eye on this. And then they scuttle off when you ask, can we talk to you about this, and why has this happened?
Is your film, do you think, essentially about reconciliation and about how a community gets back together? Because you're talking about a community, Bogoro, in terms of the initial charges against him, that was torn apart by this, a young woman who wanted to blame him, and Germain, who wants to explain his point of view. And then you also actually follow the lawyers back to, well, they go and talk to the community. I mean, what's the take on reconciliation?
I think that one of the reasons I wanted to do the film in the first place, and it kind of got very complicated with all this legal stuff. I had never thought that it would become so sort of legally. And the idea initially of my film was to do a film about how do you make communities whole again, and what can you do? Is justice the answer to making a community whole again, or are there other ways that people can start to feel better after these mass atrocities? So I was really, really interested in this aspect. And of course, the ICC has this strong reparations angle as well. And I wanted to look a bit about how that worked in practice in this incredibly damaged community.
And David Hooper talks about how that works.
We want to try and sort of bring these two groups together to try and initiate in a small way the reconciliation process, because that hasn't happened. Because the one thing that struck us, and this is obviously going further than lawyers would normally go, is the need really for these communities to stop fighting.
You can't be involved in this sort of thing for so long without being quite touched and affected by it. These aren't like ordinary cases, not just this case, but other cases. You do get drawn into it, and you do what you can, really. I mean, you do what you can.
What I find amazing about this clip, and that Hooper goes to these villages to try and set up some kind of thing by himself. So how does he do that, and how was it received in the villages? Because I assume you followed him to see this, and I trying to imagine a tiny village in Congo where he kind of shows up and being his David Hooper self, who's very much a Downton Abbey type of figure, an accent at least. So how does that go?
It was an awkward day, to say the least, because Congo remains the same as ever, that the security is still not good, that Haim and the Lender are still very much in conflict with each other. The ICC wouldn't let David and Caroline and the rest of the legal team go to Bogoro without an escort. So we arrive in this, and I was, as you say, I was there with my camera, and we arrive in this small town. We didn't have a tank, but we just had all those white Land Cruisers. I mean, you can imagine the scene as we spill out of the vehicle, and David has his laptop with Germain's apology. So we go into sort of the village hall, kind of the community center, and everyone is there. And David kind of does his introduction. People were not very receptive. He intended initially to play the apology in the village hall, but I think he realized quite early on that wasn't going to go very well. So he kind of tried to explain that he was here and that Germain was sorry. And through David, Germain was trying to say he was sorry. And there was kind of a lot of shouting. So eventually we did have to leave in quite a hurry. And the whole purpose of the trip for me had been that David was going to play Germain's apology to Sarah, the young girl who'd said she hated Germain. And his team were saying, David, it's not a good idea. I don't think we should do this. But David's like, no, we've come to do this.
I totally see that happening.
We're going to her
house. This is what we planned.
And no one knows where she is, because she's become like a mini celebrity at this point. No one had ever heard of this girl. And somehow I'd brought the weight of celebrity down on her. So, I mean, I'm already feeling very, very uncomfortable about the whole thing. But, I'd come thousands of miles. I thought ideally we would film you apologizing to this woman. So we trek off to her brother's house, and someone finds Sarah, and she arrives on a motorcycle, and David plays the apology, and she calls her brother over, who appears in the film as well, and they watch it very quietly. No one really says very much, but David keeps talking, as he does, and off we go. And that was the day.
And what's your sense then? I mean, what's real about this? What can actually be achieved?
I think in the end, because I went back many times after that, and I got to know Sarah and Ruth and Tibisima, the Babona family, who lost their parents and their property and their cattle. And in a way, I think it helped, actually. I think they were slightly gobsmacked by it all. It was just so strange. It was awkward and strange. You can only imagine how awkward and strange it was. But I think because they'd never seen Germain before. They had no idea who he was. They didn't know anything about his trial. They didn't know what had happened to him. They knew nothing. Everything they knew, it came from me, essentially, or from the legal team, because the ICC had failed to inform them. Maybe the ICC had tried to inform them and they didn't fully grasp it, but they were very smart people, so I don't know why they wouldn't have grasped it, and they grasped it just fine when I told them. We went backwards and forwards a few times, and by the end of my film, I don't want to give away the ending of my film, but maybe I will anyway. Tibisima, who is Sarah's older brother, the head of the family now because his dad was killed, had forgiven Germain. And the end of my film I find very touching. I really do. He says, "I forgive you. I feel sorry for you, Germain Katanga, and I forgive you." And I wonder if, no matter how awkward that day was with David, the attempt that he made in the awkward way, I think it did actually make some difference. And I feel like it almost made a lot more difference than however many years that the legal process in The Hague took. And I'm guessing a little here, but knowing them, I don't know. I kind of felt better by the end of it because I felt very awkward because of my role in it all with the apology. I did feel extremely awkward, and I wondered, am I doing the right thing?
Back to Germain Katanga himself. I mean, he's stuck in prison. You've actually managed to film him there in the DRC prison as well. But how does he feel? Does he feel that his situation is in the least bit acceptable?
I think he's just humongously institutionalized now. I mean, he was in The Hague for years on end. He was in his very early 20s when it all started. He's now in his late 30s. He's kind of a big man where he is. He's in a special wing for more political prisoners. The people that were involved in the killing of Laurent Kabila, the former president of Congo, are in his wing. I mean, it's quite a serious wing of quite serious people. And he's a big man there. Their lives are different there. It's not like being in The Hague. There's alcohol, there's any kind of food you want, there are phones, he's on WhatsApp, he's on Facebook. So his life there, I wouldn't say it's good, but it's more the life he's used to. So I think he's very much institutionalized and he's used to it. But he's angry, and in my film he says he's angry. He blames the ICC for ruining his life, is what he says.
And he told you what he thought about justice.
Justice is the same in America, in Iraq, Pakistan, DRC, France. It's a little bit the same. It's only the powerful who can judge those who don't have power. I wanted to be close to my family. If they say that to arrive there, I will be killed, I will accept to go and be killed in the DRC than to stay here alive without to see my families. I want to see my families. I lost my young brother. I lost my daddy. I lost my mom. I need to take care of the rest of people. My stepmother, I must take care of her. And I must go to see where my father was born.
So Germain is pretty disillusioned and says justice is only for the powerful. How do you, in the end of all this filmmaking, feel about this idea of justice and how, for instance, the ICC operates?
Yeah, I mean, I am torn. When we started, Janet, I was a big fan of international justice. Maybe
aren't we all just as a concept?
As a concept, but having spent years on this film and years with these people, it certainly didn't work in this case. No one feels any better. The people in the village got, at the end of the day, got their $250 in reparations and their programs of psychosocial support and education. But they were not happy. They were confused. Germain remains in prison. I think David Hooper kind of says it very well, I think, in a clip that you have, about who benefited the most from this trial.
Let's hear that.
And the amount of money that's been spent in the whole process, you can't help but wonder, really, with Germain Katanga still in prison, being held in Makala prison, you can't help but think, what was it all about? Why did we have a trial? Think of the millions it cost. Wouldn't it have been better if that money, that funding, had been committed, in fact, to helping these communities 10 years ago?
Who benefited the most from this? These 10 years?
Lawyers, registry, judges' salaries. I suppose.
That's a rather grim but realistic look on international justice. So after this, what happens now with this case, and maybe what you're going to do in future is going to be more investigating international justice things? Or
I feel like I feel a bit obsessed by international justice and the ICC, but what I want to do with this film, I mean, I've showed it in various places, and it's been shown at lots of NGOs and law schools and film festivals, which has been really lovely. But what I want to do is take it back to Congo. Because what I said I would do with Sarah and Ruth and Tibasima, their brother, is show it to them. Because this is their story. And they allowed me access into the saddest, worst, most terrible moments of their life. And I said I'd bring it to show them, and they were kind of like, no, you won't. I know you won't. But I desperately, desperately want to take it back to Congo. I want to show it to Germain. And I'd like to show it to some of the people in the village. So I think that would be a real benefit. Not to say that, I could do better than the ICC with their outreach programs, but I think it's really important people hear their own stories about what happened. And I'm a bit nervous about taking it back because the feelings are so raw. Decades later, the feelings are so raw still. I'm a bit nervous about that, but that's what I'm working on at the moment. So we need to make maybe a slightly shorter version of the film and subtitle it so everyone understands. So that's my project at the moment.
What strikes me coming out of the film, I don't know whether you feel this as well, is that somehow when these trials are usually over, we usually just draw a kind of a double line under it and say, okay, done, and then move on to the next thing. And this is the first time that I've come across something that's really made me think very deeply about, well, what keeps on going afterwards? What happens later? Not only, to the person involved, the perpetrator, to the lawyers who've become deeply cynical, to the community. I mean, it's there's a huge aftermath to these trials that I hadn't really thought about because I just keep on moving on from one to the next.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm starting to feel increasingly angry about it. I mean, I was kind of annoyed as it was going on because it didn't seem fair. But now I'm bordering on quite angry, I think, because no one cares what's happened to him. He's just nothing. He's nothing to international justice. Like, well, we put you on trial. We gave you an arguably unfair trial, despite promising you the best justice in the world. Yeah, that's not what he got, I don't think, in my opinion. I mean, people might disagree with me, but I don't think he got the best justice in the world. Then they shipped him back, and they've left him. They've abandoned him. And he's not the man he would have been anyway. He's completely different. The ICC made him different. The whole experience made him different. And then they've just dropped him off there. I think it's just terrible. I think it's just an absolute outrage what's happened to him. And nobody knows about it. He's so minor. He's such a little fish. And it's just, I think it's awful.
Well, we'll put the links up to the film on the podcast page, and we'll do our best to make sure that everybody gets to know in order to see the film. Thanks for coming in to chat to us. But before you go...
We have 3 asymmetrical haircuts questions that we ask of all our guests. And the first is, what do people always get wrong about your work?
What do they assume that you do as a filmmaker that they don't get right?
Oh, wow. What do people always get wrong about my work? I think it's the length of time it takes to make something, I would say. And you guys probably know this. I mean, this took years, and then it took a year to edit. And then now I'm sort of touring it around. It's just the sheer amount of time that everything like this takes and to make it good.
Is there anything that we should have asked you that we didn't ask you?
I think you asked me excellent questions. And it was nice to be able to talk about the legal aspects of it, because I always try to avoid that a little bit. Most people don't want to talk about Regulation 55. So yeah, well done.
And now that we're asking this, there's something that I forgot to ask. I realize now I really want to know, how did you get into a Congolese prison? What was that like? How did you get there? What happened?
What I imagine you getting into Congolese prison, my imagination is, along with the alcohol, you got snuck in as a bottle.
What I love about Congo, have you been to Congo, the two of you?
No, I haven't.
It was because contrasting it to the visit to the ICC and to see him there, the contrast couldn't have been sharper. I arrived in Kinshasa. I messaged him on WhatsApp or Facebook. I said, I'm here. He's like, yes, you're here. I said, I want to come and see you. Is it, what do we do? He's like, just come. So my cousin will bring you. And the cousin wasn't available. I'm like, oh no, the cousin's not available. So my fixer and I went. We got to the gate of the prison. We kind of knocked on the door and said, we're here to see the general. And they're like, okay, yeah, no problem. They kind of looked at me, and I think they maybe thought I was the lawyer. And my camera now, everything's very small. Mm-hmm. And I had a bag full of cameras. And I said to my fixer, do you think we should bring the bag full of cameras and the recording equipment into the prison? He's like, yeah, no problem at all. And once you get to the other side, there's kind of a reception area. And once you get past the reception area with a filthy pass, they give you a filthy pass. And I put my filthy pass around my neck. And the filthy pass says in French, if you lose this pass, you're going to have to stay in the prison. I'm like, ooh, that's quite serious. So we mustn't lose the pass. So I got the filthy pass. And you get into the main prison courtyard, which is a prison that was maybe meant for 10,000 people. I'm sorry, about 6,000 people. And there's 12, 13, 14,000 people, so it's packed. There's no one, it's only the prisoners. There's no more guards. There's no more... There's no more order.
But did you have that sense of like, uh-oh?
Well, it's just that thing.
Where did I get into?
You're just surrounded by, there's no one to help if there's a problem.
Right.
But
there's also no one to hinder.
No, there's no one to hinder. And there's no problem. People are very interested.
Yeah. Plus, he's the celebrity general on the fancy wing.
Yeah. He said, so we're here to see the general. And I'm with my big backpack. We sort of go, and he's got his own, his own wing, which is much nicer. It's not nice, but it's much nicer than the rest of the prison. And we walked in there, and basically I had my stuff, my camera, my mini tripod. I also had a phone, quite a good phone to film in case I wasn't able to take the camera out. But I really needed good sound, so I needed to mic him. And the prison's incredibly noisy. But once he's got his own cell, his own private cell, and once you go in there and he closes the door, no one would bother the general. So I just set it up like a regular interview. My fixer held a light. I mean, the cell is very, very small, so there was no room for different creative angles. But I set everything up, and I came every day for about 2 weeks. And after 2 or 3 days of visiting, they then started to get a bit, who are you?
Yes, why is this
why
taking
are you here?
so
What's in the bag? And I was like, no, it's no problem. And we walked in. Then the next day, I told Germain, he said, maybe next time don't bring the camera stuff. And we came back, and they're like, what's in the bag? I'm like, food and water for the general. And they said, we don't believe you. Let's see the bag. And I bought food and water for the general. And I was like, I'm very offended that you thought I was lying. They're like, oh, we're so sorry. And then after that, it was just fine. So, I mean, you can do anything you want. You can do apps. And I left a phone with Germain, the kind of the good phone. And at night, he went up to different parts of the prison, the less nice parts of the prison. And I've got lots of walking through the prison with the phone. So you've got quite interesting
shots. Oh, you asked him to film some of the shots of the prison. So there he actually filmed part of it.
He filmed part of it himself. I just thought it'd be amazing to get this insight into this kind of unusual world, because it is his own community. There's food, there's women, there's booze, there's everything you ever needed. And they didn't have any lights in their wing, and they needed to hook up somehow illegally to the main power network. And they asked for a donation from everyone who was there that day. So I think I ended up donating $20
to the illegal
to the illegal hookup of the.
So now the general's like Netflixing in Makala prison.
Well, then everyone loved me after that because I'd brought power to the war criminals, so that was good.
You empowered the war criminals.
So yeah, everything's possible. That's what I love about the Congo.
Oh yeah, I can see that. Well, thanks very much for explaining. I really wanted to know how that works, so thanks very much.
And then it was really funny because there were two different doors, and for some reason I had to go in one door, and my fixer had to go in the other, and I really wanted to stay with him. I really didn't want to be there. He's like, no, I have to go out this door, and you have to come in this door. So for quite a long time I was just there by myself in the prison yard. And I was kind of standing there thinking, oh, this is just awful. I mean, what am I going to do? But all they did was bring me a chair. It's like, give the white lady one of those plastic chairs. Yeah. I was like, oh, thank you. It's very kind. Thank you.
And the last question is, what have you been reading or watching recently that you would like to recommend? Apart, obviously, from that we should all see your movie, but
anybody else's.
Anybody else's. It doesn't have to be international justice or mass atrocity related, but we do like that kind of stuff.
Oh, that is really tough. I think because my general life is so sort of full of mass atrocity and international justice, when I sort of try and relax and read stuff and watch stuff for myself, it tends to be incredibly trivial.
Oh, well, we do murders, both of us. Country house murders are our stock in trade.
Police procedurals.
I'm gonna make a very shameful confession.
Yes, do.
You might want to cut this out. I mean, I might have to ask you to cut this out later, but I'm obsessed with zombies.
Oh, I'm obsessed with werewolves and vampires.
Okay, so I feel comfortable now.
Jane Austen, the zombie movie. Yeah, that was a great one. If you saw that, it's brilliant.
It's even worse. I'm obsessed with zombie fiction.
Oh, I'm obsessed with werewolf fiction.
Okay, well, I'm in good company. So yes. I have no highbrow recommendations for your listeners, unfortunately. It's all zombie fiction.
Okay, well, we'll get hold of that. And just very, very finally then, what's next?
I'm making another film, much closer to home this time, about a very lovely man called John Lyons, who is making his own coffin. And it will follow John, who's a remarkable human being, until he takes up residence in his coffin.
Wow. So how long is that projected to last then?
Well, hopefully a very long time. But John is 91, so he is a good age, but he's in amazing health. And after doing a film about such sad things, John is an inspiring human being. He's an activist, he's a Quaker, he's a father, he's a great-great-great-grandfather, and he has joined Extinction Rebellion. So he's regularly on the streets of London blocking roads and getting arrested. And to take some inspiration from this guy it's been an absolute treat.
Wonderful. That sounds really uplifting after that.
It is.
Disasters of international justice.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Janet again.
And this is Steph.
We thought that we should at least try to provide some kind of a short update on what's happened since.
Yeah, and this is a story that just keeps on giving. It's full of twists and turns.
And the best person to tell it, of course, is Lisa herself. So we contacted her and she sent us this voice note.
Hi there, Janet and Steph. What I thought I might do is read you an email that David Hooper sent me. I showed the film recently at the University of Essex, and I messaged him before that to see if I could find out what Germain is up to. You'll remember that David Hooper is Germain Katanga's lawyer. And the two of them, as you saw in the film, got quite close over time because they spent a lot of time together over the years that the case took to wind its way through the International Criminal Court. So he continued to stay in touch with Germain even when he went back to Kinshasa. And you probably remember that Germain ended up in prison again in Kinshasa pretty much as soon as he landed in the DRC after finishing his sentence at the IRC. Just after COVID broke out, Germain was very unexpectedly released from Makala prison in Kinshasa. He pretty much immediately went off to Ituri, which is his home, to work with the army. The interesting part of all that was that he went with his old foe, Thomas Lubanga. You remember he was charged with Thomas at the ICC. They were on opposite sides of this conflict. So Germain was a Lendu and Thomas was a Hema. So what they did is they went off to Ituri, and the idea behind them going to Ituri was that they were going to go on a peace mission. There was an armed group that had formed in Ituri in recent years. They're called Codeco. They're one of the many militias that are still operating in the area. And he was sent, along with Thomas Lubanga, to go and try and discuss peace with them.
And that's not even the final twist in this tale. So far, we have former convicted war criminal Germain Katanga, who has tried to apologize to his victim. And then after serving his sentence, he ended up back in jail in Kinshasa on more charges.
And then he's been let out with his former enemy, Thomas Lubanga. Presumably they've been hanging out together in the detention unit in Scheveningen a lot earlier. Maybe they'd made friends there. And together they conduct a peace mission in Ituri.
But of course, this story wouldn't be this story if there is not one more plot twist. So over to Lisa.
They made a few missions from what I could see, and then they got abducted. Both of them got abducted and held hostage. Eventually, they were released, or they escaped. David Hooper wasn't terribly sure which one of those happened. And as far as I know, Germain is now in Kinshasa. You're probably wondering what happened to the case against him, the domestic case against him in the local court in Congo. Last time I spoke to him, he said that the charges were still pending, but nothing had happened. So they didn't exactly drop the charges, but they did release him. Very unclear what that means and if the case will ever be taken up again. I very, very much doubt it, though.
So that's it for this rather incredible saga. Maybe they should make a movie about it, Lisa? But anyway, we'll definitely check in on DRC justice again, because it sounds like there's plenty more to talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, for keeping us up to date and keeping us informed of all the wild twists and turns of this story.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast. Created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg. Music is by audionautics.com, and you can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating and spread the word.